My name is Lisa Hainstock, and I'm a food safety specialist with the Michigan Department of Agriculture. My main job is working with local, state, and federal regulatory and public health agencies, and with industry when it comes to anything to do with foodborne illness, food recalls, tracebacks, or any other type of a food emergency. So that also includes things like intentional stuff, all of those things. I'm the one people usually call when they really don't want to. So that makes me feel real warm and fuzzy inside. But I want to talk to you a little bit about today about, are you ready for the worst? How many of you are with industry? A couple of industry people? Okay, great, great. And the rest of you are students? Okay, students in industry or students in? Okay, great, great. I'm really thrilled to get the new guys because sometimes people think, it's never going to happen to me, and I want to get people know that sometimes it does. So are you ready for the worst? How many of you have seen these CDC statistics before about foodborne illness in the US? These came out in like 2011. They say 47.8 million illnesses, 3,000 deaths. And sometimes people think, gee, that's awfully big, and I think maybe that's exaggerated. And it may be true, But from the thing with outbreaks is that if we know where the outbreak occurred, 52% of those were associated with a retail setting, okay? But whether or not you believe these numbers or not, each and every illness has consequences. This is Serena Profit. Serena was 4 years old, lived out in Oregon. This article came from September 9th, last month. Serena contracted E. coli. She went out with her family, and she had a 5-year-old friend with her. They shared a turkey sandwich. Both of them came down with E. coli. This article was put in the newspaper the day before her parents took her off life support, and she didn't make it. Her little friend, her 5-year-old friend, also got salmonella, or not salmonella, E. coli, and as far as I know, managed to survive. So whether or not you believe those numbers, there are consequences. Now, a friend of mine said to me that her favorite thing for dinner is to make reservations, because she loves to eat out. And really, we are a mobile society. We love to eat out. Some of the studies recently from the National Restaurant Association says that of 947,000 restaurant locations, people eat more than 70 billion meals or snacks, okay? But when we look at outbreaks associated with a similar time frame, about 66% of those were associated with restaurants. Now that could be for a couple of reasons. One is restaurant outbreaks tend to get reported more. People say, I and a group of people went out to a restaurant, they're more likely to call their health department. So there could be a variety of reasons. It doesn't necessarily mean that retail's at fault, but those are the ones that come to people's mind. Oh, I was too fast, okay. So before a restaurant says, I do everything right, I'm all on food safety, all on public health, I'm really there, don't think it can't happen to you. Because sometimes you might actually get something that comes into your facility already contaminated, and now you're left holding the bag. There's a couple of areas here back in 1993. Who remembers that outbreak? Does anybody know what company that was with? That was with Jack in the Box. Okay, that a massive E. coli outbreak due to undercooked hamburgers, because the hamburger itself was contaminated. There were 500 plus cases were ill. Now I want you to pay attention to these numbers right here, because we're going to talk a little bit about that. But just the cost to industry alone was over $160 million. Now imagine that was 1993. How much would that be today? Probably a whole lot more, because a whole lot more people will probably be looking for lawyers. Okay, 2009, anybody remember this one? Peanut Corporation of America. Okay, there were products I didn't even know had peanut products in them, like dog biscuits. Dog biscuits? God, my dogs are eating better than I am. But here, we had over 700 cases ill, over 9 deaths, 9 deaths and some additional deaths that they couldn't necessarily prove. That, we're talking about costs to industry of well over $1 billion. And that's probably a serious underestimate of what that cost business. And down here, Who remembers the salmonella slash tomatoes, slash peppers, slash we don't know? Okay, that was a big deal. That really impacted industry quite a bit. That right there, we had over 1,400 cases. Those are identified cases. And that cost $300 million plus just to farmers, farm workers, distributors, and retailers. Okay, that's not including lawsuits. Okay, so all we know now, these things are very, very expensive. So here's a truth about foodborne illness. In any foodborne illness outbreak or illness exposure, you're going to have a population that gets exposed, and not necessarily everybody's going to get sick, right? So there's going to be a somewhat smaller number of people who become ill, somewhat smaller number of people who are actually going to go to a doctor. Maybe they don't have health insurance, things like that. And it takes quite a long time and a lot of work before it ever gets, say, oh yes, that's a salmonella case or something. A lot happens, and many times people are just sent home from an emergency room that says you have foodborne illness, just go home, take care of yourself. And they're never tested. So in any population here, we may only have anywhere between 2 to 5% that ever get reported to the CDC. And so when you're talking about, remember we talked about those quote unquote identified cases? If you're saying that that number was up here, that was 500 plus or 1,400 plus, how many cases actually happened that we just simply didn't know about? There's estimated that 1 in 38 cases of salmonella actually gets reported to the CDC, because a lot of people just either don't get tested or it never goes through the process. Okay, so essential, not too fast. Too fast on the trigger. Here's essential truth. Food service wants happy customers. Happy customers are repeat customers. Nobody's in the business of wanting to get anybody sick. But unfortunately, if somebody does get sick and it's suspected that it is a foodborne illness, health departments are responsible to investigate those. That's written into law under the Public Health Code. So they must respond in some way. Okay, so anytime there's like an investigation of an outbreak, typically, again, most Michigan local health departments usually will investigate at the ground level. And public health and regulatory agencies, they have expertise in environmental health, that's like your inspectors, those types of people. Epidemiology, the people who study the science of epidemics or actual illness. And they look at what were people exposed to, what were well people not exposed to, so they can try and figure out what it is that the sick people have in common that the well people don't. And then obviously laboratory. Laboratory is great if you can get clinical samples for people or food samples. But oftentimes, it's referred to in the business as the three-legged stool. You have to have EH, epi, and lab in order to have a really good, effective investigation. But here's the issue. We often, and shame on me as government often forgets that industry has got to be part of the solution as well. You've got just as much to lose out of any, or just as much to do with out of here than we do. And you obviously know a lot more about your businesses than government does. And so the retail, especially retail groceries, restaurants, and other types of things where people are dealing directly with consumers, it really should be a four-legged stool. Because we cannot do our jobs as investigators without your help. It's simply impossible. Because you know more about your business than we do. Okay, so here's just a quick definition. A foodborne illness is any illness transmitted to people by food. Duh, you know, that's an easy one. But a foodborne outbreak is an incident where you get 2 or more people who experience the same illness, and sometimes it's laboratory confirmed, sometimes not, after eating the same food. Now in Michigan, we actually have written into our law that it has to be 2 people not living in the same household. Why would that be? Any ideas? Right, they share a lot of exposures. And so if somebody says, you know, my wife and I went to restaurant X, we think we got sick from there. There's no other complaints involving that facility. Yeah, it'll still be investigated, but typically it's not considered an outbreak under Michigan's definition, because there's just too many things they were exposed to to say it was definitely that place. Sometimes it is, because we have other evidence, but not always. There are sometimes, though, cases where we might not consider 2 or more people. It might be a single case. Say we get a single case of botulism or mushroom poisoning. You know, a restaurant is buying morels and somebody accidentally puts some false morels in there and you get people sick from that. Ciguatera or paralytic shellfish poisoning or any other type of fish poisoning. We don't get a lot of that in Michigan. So if we see even one case of that, that's like, oh, okay, we know that didn't come from trout from Lake Superior. That usually came from some sort of a tropical fish that usually is served at a restaurant. Or any other really rare disease that's related to ingestion of food. And unfortunately, the rare diseases seem to be popping up more and more. Okay, so how do we detect outbreaks? Most of the time, it's the phone call to the health department from the irate consumer. I know it was this place. I ate there and 15 minutes later, I got diarrhea and vomiting. That's gotta be that restaurant. So that's usually how those things come up. However, sometimes local health departments find out about them from medical care providers. The medical care providers are required, there are certain diseases they must actually report to the local health department, things like salmonella, E. coli, these types of things. So sometimes the health department doesn't find out that they have a problem until they get a call from a doctor's office or an emergency room. However, do you guys ever get complaints? Yeah, right. Sometimes industry actually finds out about it first. Because, you know, somebody says, well, I and my husband went there on Monday night and we had whatever, we both got sick on Tuesday and I saw our friends there and I called them and they got sick too. So that's a complaint sometimes where you've got the first note, okay? And these are the types of things that we would very much, at the health department level, they would like to hear about. And I know maybe that's like borrowing trouble, but we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay. So again, we really have to stress the importance of industry and government working together. We cannot do it on our own. And industry can't do it by itself because you don't have the same resources or maybe the same investigation resources that are available at the health department. Nobody knows your business as well as you do. You know your suppliers, you know your distributors, you know your menu bills. You know, like I usually use supplier X, but during that time frame I had to go to somebody else because they didn't have what I needed. You know that, we don't know that. And so you guys bring a tremendous amount to the table in terms of resources and information to help us find out, was it something that happened at your facility or did it happen someplace else? And we cannot do that without you. Okay. So back in 2006, the federal government and a number of different government associations put together a group called the Council to Improve Foodborne Outbreak Response, otherwise known as CIFOR, C-I-F-O-R. And CIFOR's main goal was to take model practices from around the country and try to distill those things down to help investigators get better and faster at investigating foodborne illness. Now, as an outcome of all of that information we talked about industry getting involved in 2009, they put together a C4 industry work group, which was made up of people from government and people from public health like the CDC, but also a lot of people from industry. And you can see a number of the industry members that were associated here. We had National Restaurant Association, we had a lot of the chains, grocery store chains, and big chain restaurants, and a lot of these like AFDOs, the Association of Food and Drug Officials, CDC, FDA. I mean, really everybody came to the party. And what we did was we said, you know what? A lot of the big companies have got crisis management plans. If they have an outbreak, they know exactly what to do. They know who to call and everything. What about the people who don't have those kind of resources, who aren't that big and have never dealt with this before? We need to come up with some simple guidance and information for them, so if they get an outbreak, they know what to do. And so you'll see everybody got actually a handout of a thing that we developed here. It's called the C4 Industry Guidelines. They're foodborne illness response guidelines for owners, operators, and managers of food establishments. Okay, this is a free document. You'll notice that it was released in 2013 and we started in 2009. So that tells you how long it took to come together and decide on what was best. But inside, it's got like flow diagram, it's got procedures, very, very simple, quick, easy to read procedures. It's also got a lot of tools in it, forms and things that you can photocopy. And you know, if I need to know as an investigator who was working on that day, you can write down who was working and what they were doing. You know, there's a lot of really great tools in there. This is available online at the www.c4.us. It's available free for download. And you were actually, MRA was very, very gracious in copying those in color for you, so you do have a copy there. The original looks like, and mine's pretty beat up now, but it is actually a spiral bound thing. But not everybody has got these, so it's probably easiest that you've got what you have there. Okay. So it's got a lot of contents in there. What do you need to prepare? What should I do in advance, just in case the worst happens? How do I handle complaints and notifications to the health department if and when I need to do that? How do I put together my information if they need to know who my suppliers are and who's and what they were supplying me? Is there a checklist there so I can kind of look and say, hey, am I doing things okay? There's like a self-assessment sort of out there. There's a little bit of guidance in there about how to deal with media if you get the call from the reporter. I hear that there's been an outbreak at your facility, and you're caught flat-footed. It gives you some good stuff there. And there's a number of other tools too. This is just sort of a brief list here, but okay. So this right here, don't let this scare you, but this tells you a little bit about how the program works. It gives you some information about how to prepare. Real simple stuff about kind of no-brainer things, like having a contact list, And maybe you find out you get notified by the health department or you get a customer complaint, but then you find out, okay, we suspect we have an outbreak, okay? There's different sections here. There's one about the investigations part, and it takes you a little bit through how that gets investigated. A little bit about communications, both internally with employees and externally with the health department or media, and a little bit about some of the control measures that you can be considering based on the information that's coming across on the investigation itself. Okay, so here's some proactive things you could do there. Obviously, having an emergency contact list, having the number of your inspector or your health department, your attorney. Do people ever want to sue restaurants?
Do they ever want to?
Do they ever want to? Whether it was your fault or not, my attorney is going to call you. So I think you want him on speed dial, or her, let's not be sexist. Your corporate leadership, say if you're a part of a chain or something like that, you better call the owner and let them know, hey, we've got a problem. Your employees, there may be issues where you're going to need to gather your employees together to talk to them about things, or the health department's going to need to question them. So it's nice to have that contact information. If you have a quality assurance group, and again, most mom and pops don't, but in case they do, and your suppliers and distributors. There's another one too, as I walked through that group, that I thought should be on that list and wasn't, and that's your insurance company. Okay, because who's going to have to pay if somebody takes you to court, right? You want to make sure your insurance company knows, hey, there's a problem. Okay. What about a spokesperson? Do you want your hostess answering questions from the media, if the media calls? So you may want to think about who's going to be the spokesperson for your firm. Is it going to be you, or is it going to be a manager that's involved in the investigation? You want to make sure that whatever message gets communicated from your firm is the message you want going out, right? And record keeping. Again, local health departments, we're going to want to know, especially if we suspect maybe it was a sick food worker, who was working, what were their duties, what shipments were you getting of a particular product during certain time frames. Did you have any big reservations at parties? Because the health department may want to talk to them and say, did anybody get sick? If you got two people that are sick, a husband and wife, and it looks like maybe something's going on, we may want to look and see, are there other cases out there? Because that can help us to determine, is it exposure to a certain product at your firm, or maybe it was something else. And a complaint log. I don't know, does anybody keep a log of complaints? Oh, good. Okay. So when do you call the health department? Do you want to call them every single time somebody says, I ate your burger and 15 minutes later I got diarrhea? You'd be calling them maybe a lot. And the health department may say, oh no, whoa, wait a minute. We only want to hear about it in certain cases. And so you might want to talk with your health department and say, when do you want me to contact you if I see this? But here's some strict guidance. If you get 2 or more, oops, wait a minute. Oh, okay. I'm really sorry, I just have a fat tongue. If you get 2 or more illness complaints for a similar time frame, especially if it's from different parties, a husband and wife, and then you get a call from another group of people that were there on the same day or around the same time, sometimes that's kind of an indication that if you've got more than one group of people that are reporting illness, you might want to let the health department know. Or if you have illness reports involving a large group, you catered or had a big group that came in and 10 out of 15 people are reporting illness, yeah, that might be an issue. Sick employees. If you have an employee that has been either diagnosed or has been exposed to norovirus, Hep A, Shigella, Salmonella, or E. coli, and that should be 0157. 01567 is not really existing, but that was my fault. Or if you have multiple workers that are calling in reporting GI illness, you may want to let the health department know, because that might be the first indication that something's happening, okay? Or if you find out that you used a product that you later got notified was recalled. You know, I got these tomatoes and I served them on Friday and I got called on Sunday that they were recalled. Oops, there might be an issue. So that's probably the best guidance that I have there, okay? All right, so within the thing, and you can actually open it up and take a look at those tools. They're in the second part. There's actually an illness complaint form, if you don't already have one, where you can sort of get the who, where's, why's, where to forward, what, you know, how many people came, who's saying that they're sick, how do I contact them again? It's just kind of nice to have this information here. You may not ever get any more, but if you do get complaints, then you can start to look at them and say, hey, is there something going on here in terms of time frame? It's also nice to have just a basic log. If you're not the person that takes all complaints, maybe it might be the night manager takes a complaint and then somebody else takes one there. If they're being entered into a log, you can then look at that and say, hey, we've had 3 complaints in the last 2 days. Maybe you didn't take all the calls yourself, but somebody else did, and you're saying, you know what, maybe something odd might be going on. Okay. Information that the health department is interested besides complaints. If in fact they say, you know, everybody who got sick said that they ate a meatloaf. So we want to find out about how you make your meatloaf, where you get the supplies, how hot do you cook it to, do you keep temperature log? So if we're actually suspecting a particular menu item, we're going to ask you things like, where did you get the ingredients during that time frame? Who cooked it? How did you cook it? So there's tools there that you can use to help you record that information. And you can send it right to the health department, as opposed to, you know, just trying to do everything verbally. If there's a possibility that there might be sick employees, either they got sick at the same time other people did, or they were sick previous to that, they're going to want to know, again, who worked, what were they doing. There's a list that you can list the employees and the contact information. If you have to talk to your employees and say, have any of you been sick? There's actually a health assessment form that you can use to get some basic information from each employee about if they were sick, what kind of symptoms they had. And you can ask that information. That's actually specifically exempted under the whole HIPAA thing, because obviously that's a public health threat. And there's illness decision trees in there too. How many of you stopped at the FDA booth and you saw the employee health thing? Those things have been reproduced inside of that book. So kind of like if I have an employee who has vomiting and diarrhea and I serve this kind of population, can they be restricted to just sweeping the floor, or do I have to send them home? And those decision trees can be really, really helpful in making the right determination. If contamination happens someplace else, where did your food come? And, you know, and when? Because we want to know, when was it delivered? We might be dealing with a specific lot that's contaminated. So we're going to want to get that information from you. If we suspect maybe the contamination happened in the restaurant, because no matter the best of intentions, sometimes it happens. We'll want to know, how do you make that food? We need to make a flow chart of how that food is made and who made it at the time. So we can try and figure out, are there steps in that procedure that maybe need a little improvement? So, go ahead and click what you think the answer is. When a foodborne outbreak happens, the operator will always be notified first by the health department. True or false? What's the answer? False. Sometimes you're the first ones to find out about it. Or you might get called by a supplier that said, I sold you something that turned out it's making people sick over the next town. So there might be an issue. Okay? So let's see how people did on this one. So, 83% answered the question correctly. Okay? An employee should be excluded. That means sent home from work. They cannot work at all. If they have the following symptom. Now remember this, hint, 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 you could look at your decision trees that are in the tool for A, diarrhea, B, vomiting, C, both A and B, D, cough, or E, infected wound. When might you not send somebody home for diarrhea? Does anybody know? Okay. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, if you have somebody who has a chronic illness like Crohn's disease, stuff like that, you cannot legally hold that against them and make them go home. Okay. What about vomiting? What's one medical condition where you can get a lot of vomiting?
Pregnancy.
Pregnancy, right? Is that a communicable illness? God, I hope not. So if you have somebody who's pregnant and they're running to the bathroom, maybe it's a good idea to send them home because they're not feeling well, but you really can't send them home for a food safety issue. Okay, so the answer is both A and B. Okay, for efficient outbreak response, the operator should have the contact information for the following person or persons. A, their health department inspector, B, their attorney, C, their supplier and distributor, D, their employees, or E, all of the above. Here we go. Is A wrong? No. But you really should have the contact numbers for all these people. Because you might, depending on the situation, you may need to call your supplier right away. Or you may need to call your attorney right away. In fact, I usually recommend people do if it's something that's an outbreak. So, okay. If a firm follows all applicable food safety regulations, they're never going to have an outbreak. We hope. From our lips to God's ears, right? Why is it not assured that you're not going to have an outbreak?
It could be an outside source.
It could be an outside source, and I don't care how good your suppliers are, how many audits they have, how good their protocols and protections and processes are in place. Accidents happen, and they can happen at any time in the food distribution system. So maybe your supplier did a great job, but something goes on a truck and the truck itself has a contamination issue. And then now it gets dropped off at your facility and you're left holding the bag. There's a lot of things that we don't necessarily have control over, so that is actually the correct answer is false. Okay, here's a trick question. A customer begins vomiting violently on the floor of your restaurant during a dinner rush. Should you call the health department? Why wouldn't you call? Yes?
Because it's very possible it has nothing to do with food safety.
Absolutely. That's very true. Why would you call?
Because it could have been the norovirus and it goes airborne, and you want to make the health department aware that you're doing all you can to mitigate any possible spreading of the norovirus throughout your restaurant.
Do you have experience with that?
Yeah.
That's very true. And the answer is yes, you should call. Because the thing about norovirus is it spreads throughout the population at any given time. It's extremely contagious. Viral particles in vomit can spread anywhere from 10 to 20 feet in every direction when somebody throws up. Okay? So if somebody vomits in your dining room, what happened to all the particles? They're now all over every table, Probably if it was near the buffet, it's on the buffet now. It has happened. It has happened. They've actually done studies where they found out the closer you sat to an area where somebody vomited, the more likely they were to get sick. It's called the bullseye effect. Okay? So if you had something like that happen, you probably really want to call the health department just to give them a heads up, hey, we had a vomiting incident here. You know, and they may want, and also not every sanitizer works on norovirus. A lot of sanitizers like Quat do not work on norovirus. You usually have to go with something that's made specifically for norovirus. I was talking to the Ecolab guy. Apparently they do now have something called Noro what?
Noro clean. No, I've
Noro.
made it up.
It's like Norosand or something like that. But usually it involves some type of a bleach solution, a fairly high concentration of bleach. Health departments in Michigan all have access to norovirus cleanup guidelines, and they are available on the web as well. That can give you a really good idea about how to clean it up if you have an incident. Because again, Quat will not work. I have a lot of outbreaks that have happened when people cleaned it up with Quat, didn't do a thing, and you had an outbreak. There is a high price to pay, a very high price to pay sometimes if you have an outbreak, even if you're not the one that caused the problem. I got some figures here. I have a very dear friend who worked with me on the industry guidelines, who works for a chain restaurant that I shall not name. But I asked him, how much would an average outbreak cost your department or your agency? And she said for a single E. coli outbreak involving a couple of stores in their chain, just for employee testing, it was somewhere around $8,600. This was for an E. coli outbreak. For getting a third party to come in and do a lot of like answering the phone, you know, they send it to a 1-800 number if you have experienced illness because, you know, you don't want the restaurant getting all the calls. That was probably another $15,000. The cost per restaurant involved was $36,000 in loss. And the total amount, all of those plus the lawsuits, was about $1.5 million. For an E. coli outbreak that technically wasn't their fault. They got contaminated product. But they had to deal with it, and they were made to pay. Okay, yes?
Legally, are they able to go back and take, get some sort of,
Compensation from the
yeah,
company that's
from the
at fault?
distributor? Or is it just a contract?
Anybody could sue anybody. So my suggestion is, of course, have your attorney on, have your insurance company, because usually your insurance company is going to be the one to go back and go after somebody else's insurance company. But I do know that, you can't get blood out of a stone either. And sometimes when it came, I know with the PCA thing, halfway through all of that, and they said, yep, and they said, we're declared bankruptcy. So now, that kind of wiped the slate clean, and I don't know if people ever got their money back from that company. I have no idea. But finally, some years later now, the guy was just indicted this year for intentionally causing the outbreak because he knew he had contaminated product and he shipped it anyway. He just told people, I don't care, ship it. So. Okay, so here's our essential truth slides. Again, what do we want? Happy customers. We want satisfied customers because they are repeat customers. Okay? And do we want to make people ill? No, nobody does. Okay? Health departments are going to follow up. Whether they believe it or not, they have to follow up in some way. But investigators, with your help, the faster we solve an outbreak, maybe the fewer people might get sick, the lower your losses are going to be, and the quicker you can make changes and take the appropriate control measures. So hopefully that's going to help mitigate things a little bit. Sometimes, with your help, we may find out that you weren't the cause of the outbreak, it was something else. Okay? And again, I bring your attention back to the issue of the tomatoes. Okay? Did everybody go through that scare where it was like for a while nobody wanted to use tomatoes? Okay? And the Florida tomato producers, when FDA was going, oh, I don't eat tomatoes. And they're going, no, oh, wait a minute. You're saying that the distribution of these tomatoes came through this channel and this channel, and we're telling you our tomatoes don't do that. It's not our tomatoes. And they were able to exonerate a lot of the growers because they said, oh, okay, yeah, it didn't come from them. So with the information that you can help provide, sometimes we can find out it isn't your fault. You know, and that's what we want to do. We want to solve the problem and protect the public and save lives, but we also don't want to throw somebody under the bus and then maybe the people who are responsible, they aren't made to respond to that. And the problem happens again because we didn't find the problem first time. Okay? So, now let's see if this will work for us. Maybe, maybe not. Okay, it did work this time. It must have just been that thing. So what can you do? Obviously, educating yourself and your staff on safe food handling. Not only what constitutes safe food handling, but why. Why is it important for your people to wash their hands before they put on a new pair of gloves? Why is it important for them to tell you if they've been vomiting or have diarrhea? You know, if they don't understand, if you just tell them, hey, do this, and you know, they don't really understand the reasons why, sometimes it's easier for people to ignore. But if you really make it truthful for them, they can understand that. We're cooperative with the health department. We're not the bad guy, although I know that when I was an inspector, people, when I came in, the color counted down with their faces, but it's like, no, I don't want to make you feel like I'm your enemy. I want you to have good business. I want you to stay working and you have, you know, a lot of you know, money coming in. But I also need to protect people. So let's work together in doing that. Okay? Because it's not in anybody's best interest. Be proactive on complaints and reports of illness. If you got something that just, you know, doesn't seem right, call the health department. Let them know, because they might not know about it until a whole lot more people get sick. And when people get sick, remember there are consequences, like Serena Prophet and her family. Okay? So the faster we get to it, the faster we can stop people from becoming ill. And if you can, make yourself familiar with those guidelines before anything ever actually happens. You know, it doesn't help if you're in the middle of a crisis and going, what do I do? And now you look at this book and go, what? Where do I start? You know, so take a look at it. There's some really good tools in there, tools that you can use not only during an outbreak, but even use proactively. You know, like I said, the self-assessment checklists and some of the other things. Okay? And that's our presentation.